I'm pregnant. Don't come back. Huh? Didn't you hear me? I'm pregnant with George's baby. No, that can't be. Julia, it's your own fault. You neglected your husband under the pretense of accompanying your mother. You've made your bed, now lie in it. Madison said this with a triumphant look. But I was not upset at all and jumped on the phrase, "don't come back's" part. Really? I'm delighted. My unexpected reaction left George and Madison dumbfounded. Julia, what are you saying? Aren't you mad at me for cheating? Well, I was surprised at first, but I'm not really mad. Besides, I already have a new place to call home. A new home. What are you talking about? Yes, I already have a place to go. So I can leave George, who I no longer trust, to Madison. I muttered this to myself. And little did these two know, a huge disaster was waiting for them later. I am Julia, a 43-year-old working in construction. I have a childhood friend named Madison. I've been playing with her since I was a child. However, by the time we entered junior high, we both became rebellious and ended up in a gang-like relationship. This relationship continued until we graduated from high school, but as adults, we ended up living completely opposite lives. When I was in my 20s, I was immersed in polishing myself, such as getting a qualification while working in order to make up for my dislike of studying since I was a child. My efforts paid off, and my career was on track by my 30s. On the other hand, Madison spent all through her 20s and 30s hanging out, believing it was a waste not to enjoy life while she could. As we passed our 40s, both unmarried, Madison didn't seem to be in a hurry. In contrast, I, who was raised by a single mother after losing my father at a young age, I started to think about getting married to make my mother happy. There were many men at my workplace, but those close to my age were all married. I casually asked my boss if he knew anyone good. Then, my boss introduced me to a single man close to my age. His name is George. George was 2 years older than me and ran a construction company. He seemed serious and respectable at first glance. George runs the company he inherited from his parents, and like me, he is dedicated to his work. Despite his busy life, he hadn't shown much interest in marriage until now. We hit it off due to our many commonalities and continued dating. A year after we met, we promised to marry each other. I shared the news with Madison. Really? That's great, Julia. Congratulations. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm getting married before you. Don't worry about it. Just be happy. Madison was happy for me. Thank you so much. You must come to the wedding. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Having informed Madison, all that was left was to prepare for the wedding. Tomorrow, I will be visiting George's family home for the first time. I was excited and thrilled. However, I would later learn that this joy was only temporary. The next morning, I got ready with great enthusiasm. I wondered what George's family home was like. Although it's called his family home, George's parents have already passed away. So, the family home refers to the house where George is currently living alone. Nonetheless, I was very curious about the environment George grew up in. I had wanted to visit George's house before, but he never invited me. George's house seems to be quite far from mine, located at the foot of a mountain. I have a car, so I thought about going there directly after asking for the address. But George insisted on picking me up because the place was hard to find. While driving, George said somewhat sheepishly, "Well, it's quite rural, so you might be surprised. No, I prefer quiet environments over bustling places. If it's rural, maybe it's serene? I'm really looking forward to it." I said this to lighten the mood, but George seemed hesitant, as if he didn't want me to get my hopes up too much. But for me, it was exciting just to think about the place where the person I love lives. Just thinking about it was nothing but exciting. The car drove for over an hour after entering the neighboring county. I headed into a dimly lit bamboo grove. It was far from the idyllic countryside I imagined. Then, the car stopped in a place that felt like a creepy, abandoned site. "We're here. This is my house." I was let out in a garage surrounded by piles of rubble. In front of me an old house that seemed to be over 100 years old stood. Is this your house?" Yes, this is my home. It's a bit old but well built. I stood there with my mouth agape, looking around every corner of the house. The site was large, but the building was a small wooden bungalow. I naively thought that he would move out after getting married. However, George's next words took me by surprise. Come on in. This is the house we'll be living in together from now on, so feel free to make yourself at home. Excuse me? Living in this house forever after getting married? Feeling faint, I asked George. Are we going to live here? It's nearly a 2-hour drive from my work. What? Julia, you can just quit your job after we get married. My earnings are more than enough for us to live on. I was shocked by George's unexpected words. We had discussed our careers before, but he had never mentioned wanting me to quit my job after marriage. But I told you I love my job. Why would you decide on your own that I should quit without discussing it with me? When I pressed him, George looked puzzled and replied. Isn't it common sense for a woman to quit her job and stay home once she marries a man with a good income? My mother did the same. So I thought it went without saying. I was dumbfounded with my eyes wide open. I never imagined there would still be men with such old-fashioned views today. This place is not only far from my work but also from my family home. I currently live with my mother, and moving so far away would be inconvenient in many ways. I wanted to discuss this, but my mind went blank and I couldn't find the words. And this house. Although it's an old house with a solid structure, parts of the walls were crumbling, and the floors creaked as I walked. The bathroom and toilet are outdated, and there are few rooms, which would be inconvenient if we had children. Can we really live in this house forever? Seeing my anxious expression, George tried to reassure me. Don't worry. It might take some getting used to at first, but old houses have their charm. You'll come to find it comfortable. No, that's not the issue. I wanted to say, but I couldn't find the words. For now, I decided not to say anything and asked George to take me home before it got too late. You should stay here tonight since it's so far away. George said casually, but I was in no mood to take up his offer. That day, I went to bed early and lay in bed thinking. Right, even though I initially agreed to live in George's family home, we could always move eventually. Having worked all this time, I have some savings, and of course, George should have enough money to build a new house too. I decided to discuss this with George the next time we met. On my next day off, I brought up the idea of a new house with George. However, he didn't seem keen on the idea. Why? It seems like such a waste to move when we already have a house. George had already set his mind on living in his own house. I wondered if it was selfish of me to care about the convenience of getting to work or living closer to my family home. I felt a rising irritation. Yet, I didn't fall out of love with George, and we got married as planned. Indeed, considering his status as a construction company owner, our wedding was a grand affair. Of course, Madison attended too. Madison, looking flashy and youthful, stood out at the venue, attracting attention from the men. Even George, the groom, asked if that beautiful woman was my friend. Though I was the bride, I felt a tinge of jealousy towards Madison. Somehow, the wedding went off without a hitch, and our married life began. George was content with living leisurely in his familiar home. Reluctantly, I quit my job to focus on home life, but something felt amiss. So, I had been planning something. One day, I received a call from the hospital where my mother was a regular patient. According to the hospital, my mother had suddenly become ill and needed to be hospitalized. I rushed to the hospital and entered my mother's room. Mom, are you okay? Julia, I'm sorry to worry you. My mother's complexion was very poor. Upon asking the doctor, it seemed her condition was serious, and she would need a long hospital stay. I decided to stay with my mother for a while and went back home to pack my things. I told George the first needed to be with my mother for some time. But George didn't seem too worried about my mother. Ah, I see. Well, take your time. I was taken aback by his reaction. As if I were going on a leisure trip instead of attending to my sick mother. Yet, George seemed annoyed by my expression. What? Why that look? Did I say something wrong? No, it's nothing. Thinking about it, George was raised in a wealthy family. Expecting him to understand might be asking too much. So, I didn't argue further and quickly returned to the hospital. It's been almost 3 months since my mother was hospitalized. Her condition remains the same, and she still needs my support. What bothers me more is that George has not visited even once. Is he still holding a grudge because I frowned at his words? If that's the case, it's incredibly petty. My mother, lying in her bed, looked at me with concern. Julia, is George okay? Don't worry about me, maybe you should go back home to him. It's okay, Mom. I do go home occasionally. I said this to avoid worrying her further, but to be honest, I was anxious. For about the first month, I indeed went back home to check on things. However, George was in a bad mood and wouldn't even speak to me. After finishing chores like cleaning and laundry, I would just head back to the hospital. Eventually, I started to feel as if George was managing the household chores on his own, and perhaps I wasn't needed at home. At night, when my mother was asleep, I would lie awake, thinking about various things. Is it really okay to continue like this? Months passed by. During this time of contemplation, I received a phone call. When I looked at my phone, it was a call from Madison. Hello? Julia, it's been a while. I was just wondering how you've been, so I decided to call. Madison, it really has been a long time. How have you been? Hearing Madison's voice after such a long time made my heart leap with joy. However, I felt a slight hesitation in her response to my question. Yeah, I'm doing fine. Oh. I see. Somehow, the atmosphere felt tense, and I wasn't sure what to say next. Then, Madison started the conversation. Hey, when are you coming back home next? Excuse me? I hadn't told Madison that I was currently away from home, taking care of my mother. So, I was puzzled as to why she would ask such a question. But since she had reached out after so long, I tried to remain calm and asked her. What's up, Madison? Did you call because you needed something? No, nothing in particular. I just wanted to hear your voice. While she was talking, I heard a man's voice in the background saying, "Hey, Madison," which sounded oddly familiar. Upon hearing that voice, Madison exclaimed, "Oh," and hurriedly ended the call. That voice, could it be? A shiver ran down my spine. It had been over 3 months since I stopped returning home. A bad feeling started to creep over me, so I decided to go home the next day. The following day, after the morning rounds at the hospital, I rushed home. Since it was Sunday, George should be at home. When I arrived by car, I noticed a bright red sports car parked in the space where my car should be. This car, it looked familiar. Upon unlocking the front door and entering, I saw a pair of stylish high heels in the entrance. It seemed my premonition was correct. George, are you here? As I called out from the entrance, George appeared with wide eyes. Julia, why are you back all of a sudden? At least give me a heads up before returning. Why? These shoes and the car in the garage. Aren't they Madison's? Yeah. Madison just happened to stop by. George tried to smooth over the situation, but he was clearly flustered. Then, Madison emerged from the back, wearing a casual dress. Don't come out, George said to Madison, but she appeared nonchalant. Why not? There's no need to sneak around. We have to talk about it eventually, right? Madison seemed defiant. Without any sign of remorse, she stood boldly in front of me. Madison, usually so stylish, was wearing a simple dress that covered her ankles. Almost like a maternity dress. As I was thinking this, Madison revealed a surprising fact. I'm pregnant. Don't come back here. What? Didn't you hear me? George and I are having a baby. That can't be, really? Madison, standing defiantly, dropped this bombshell while George beside her sighed deeply, looking down. Perhaps George had hoped for a more calm and collected conversation. It's your fault, Julia. You neglected your husband under the guise of accompanying your mother. You brought this upon yourself. Madison said triumphantly. But I wasn't upset. Seeing that I wasn't panicking, Madison said, pouting. What's with that attitude? I heard you didn't like this house. That's fine by me. I don't mind the old house or the spacious grounds. And there are no nosy neighbors. Plus, George is kind and wealthy, so it's perfect. George, perhaps feeling validated by Madison's words, suddenly changed his demeanor from awkward to confident. When I saw Madison at the wedding, it fell in love at first sight. So, I thought I'd ask you, who dislikes this house? To leave so Madison and I could live here. Exactly. George looked up my contact information from the guest list and called me. He said you weren't coming back, so he wanted me to come over. I was hesitant at first, but he seemed to need me so much. I couldn't say no, Madison bragged. Oh, I see. I responded indifferently. Humph. You're just putting on a brave face. You must be seething inside. I'll say it again, I'm carrying George's child. So, don't come back here. Madison said. To that, I responded with a smile. Is that so? Gladly. My unexpected reaction left George and Madison dumbfounded. Julia, what are you saying? Aren't you angry about my affair? Well, I was surprised at first, but not really angry. Besides, I already have a new place to live. A new home. What do you mean? George looked puzzled, so I explained. Actually, I've been looking for a new house since we got married. I thought we could live here initially. But it's not practical if we have children. There are no schools around here. Madison seemed taken aback by my words. She hadn't considered the need for schools when thinking about their future child. Why didn't you discuss such an important matter with me? Because you said you didn't want to move out from here. So, I looked into real estate and researched online by myself. But now, it's no longer your concern. What do you mean? George was astonishingly clueless. Despite his affair and getting Madison pregnant, he seemed to think we could still move together. I continued calmly. Since you've chosen Madison and are expecting a child with her, you should just live here with her. You can afford to send your child to a distant private school and drive them every day. George seemed to accept my words with nods of agreement. Madison was surprised at my calm demeanor and asked, Julia, aren't you too accepting of this? How can you so easily accept George and my relationship? No, I've just lost my trust in George, who never once visited my seriously ill mother in the hospital. So, I've decided to live with my mother in the new house. We've arranged for home nursing care from the hospital. Aren't you really angry about the affair? You won't demand alimony later, will you? George was still only thinking about himself. A true product of a sheltered upbringing. Don't worry. I won't do anything underhanded. I said with a slight smile. I knew that without my intervention, these two would face their own significant challenges later on. Then George and I divorced. And I moved to the new house with my mother. The new house, made barrier-free, allows my mother to recuperate comfortably. It's close to the hospital, so help is readily available if needed, which gives me peace of mind. George was living his newlywed life with Madison in that house. Madison's belly was gradually growing, but there was no hospital nearby. So, George had to drive her over an hour for each medical checkup. Despite this, one might expect them to have a happy married life, but then, after a while, I received a call from George. Hey, why do we have to leave our house? I thought to myself that the day had finally come. Did your uncle come by? Yeah, he did. Did you know about this and keep it a secret? The uncle he referred to was his father's brother. Oh, but George, you should have known that the house is owned by your uncle. Ah. It seemed George had forgotten about this and had been living in the house all this time. I remembered being told when I visited George's relatives before our marriage. Before George's father, the eldest son, passed away, he entrusted the ownership of the family home to his brother, the uncle. They believed George was unreliable as an heir, so they couldn't let him inherit it. So, George was living there with his uncle's consent. I completely forgot about that. But my uncle suddenly came by yesterday, saying he had informed his wife that they were planning to sell the land. Why didn't you say anything about this important matter? Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh inwardly at how much of a character George's uncle was. I had told the uncle everything that led to the divorce. And then, he had promised to give George a piece of his mind. I'm sorry. I was about to tell you about the house being sold, but then you went ahead and got Madison pregnant. I thought I'd leave the rest to the two of you. But it's fine, isn't it? You have enough money to move anywhere, right? Ah, well, about that. George's voice suddenly darkened. I knew what he was about to say, but I pretended not to know and asked him. What's wrong? I've been demoted from the position of president. My uncle said the employees wouldn't follow me because I'm unreliable. He told me to start over as a regular employee. So, my salary is going to be less than half. Oh, is that so? I responded nonchalantly, but I already knew all about it from George's uncle. Madison is furious. She wanted to remodel the house we lived in and build a spacious mansion. When she heard we had to vacate the house and that my salary was cut, she hasn't spoken to me since last night. What should I do? George sounded almost on the verge of tears. It was clear that Madison had started dating George for his money. Well, that's something I'm not involved in anymore. You'll have to figure it out yourself. Wait, what? No. Hold on. George tried to keep me on the line, but I didn't care and quickly hung up. The next moment, I received a call from Madison. I didn't want to answer, knowing what she would probably say, but I figured she would keep calling persistently if I ignored her. So, reluctantly, I answered the phone. Madison's voice came through like a torrent. Hey. What are you going to do about this? It's all your fault, Julia. I thought I had married a rich man. Just as I expected, Madison lashed out with predictable complaints. Well, it's fine, isn't it? George is a kind husband for you. It's not like he's unemployed. I can't accept this. You knew, didn't you? We had to leave the house. And you kept quiet about it. That's so cowardly. What would have happened if I had told you earlier? If you couldn't have the ideal life you wanted, you would have left, right? That would be pitiful for the child in your belly. Madison had nothing to say in response when I hit back with the truth. No matter what life becomes, now that you're going to have a family, you need to stand firm. After conveying just that, I quickly hung up again. I harbored no resentment for losing George. I just couldn't believe I lacked the judgment in men. Forced to leave, George and Madison apparently moved to her parents' house. Despite Madison's parents being angry about their daughter marrying a man who left his wife, they gladly accepted the situation for the sake of their forthcoming grandchild. Years later, George and Madison, with their child in tow, showed up at my place. I hadn't given them my new address, but they had apparently spotted me in town and followed me to find out where I lived. I wondered why they went through all that trouble. Julia, are you there? Actually, we were in the area for our child's kindergarten entrance exam and decided to stop by. Madison announced pompously upon barging into my home. Even as a mother now, she still wore flashy makeup and fashion. I didn't really want to see her, but I responded politely to avoid any unnecessary comments. Still the same, I see. So, how did it go? I wasn't interested in Madison's affairs, but I knew she would bring something up, so I asked anyway. Haha, listen to this. Our child got into the best kindergarten in this area. So, you came all the way here just to tell me that? Well, congratulations. It was clear she had come to brag. Exactly. Our child is so talented, just like his dad. And he inherited my good looks, which made a great impression during the interview. Madison continued to ramble on with her boasting. Oh, that's nice for you. I replied sarcastically, which seemed to irritate Madison as she glared at me with a scowl. Despite someone's actions almost leading us to hell, we're now happily living as a family. There's nothing like having a family and a home, right? George? Ah, yeah. Sure. George finally spoke up from behind Madison. Their son, indeed resembling Madison with his well-defined features, glared at me with a haughty expression. Seemingly inheriting not just her looks but her prideful demeanor as well. And this, the best kindergarten, is. Haha, you wouldn't know about kindergartens, being single, right? It's Oliver Kindergarten, just nearby. Madison spoke disdainfully, so I quickly retorted. Who said I'm single? I've remarried. George and Madison looked dumbfounded at my revelation. Really? I thought this was your family home where you lived with your mother. Yes, but now I live here with my husband. At that moment, my husband, David, appeared. Got guests? Please, come in. Ah. You are. Upon seeing David, both George and Madison exclaimed in surprise. Recognizing them, David responded. Ah, you must be Liam's parents who came for the interview the other day. You were the interviewer, right? Sorry for the late introduction, I'm David Oliver, the principal of Oliver Kindergarten. You're Julia's friends, I take it? My wife always speaks highly of you. Learning that David was the principal of Oliver Kindergarten left George and Madison speechless. The principal is your husband? Yes, that's right. I can't believe someone like you would marry the principal of a prestigious private kindergarten. How did you even meet? Madison criticized me. But I had worked hard and changed since the old days. I wasn't about to be belittled by her now. We met through work. My company was contracted for the renovation of the kindergarten. It's true. I was impressed by her dedication to her job, so I was the one who asked her out, and that's how our relationship started. David added shyly. Let me introduce you properly. This is my ex-husband, George, and his wife, Madison, who used to be my best friend and took George from me. Hey. Don't introduce us like that. Yeah, what kind of thing is that to say in front of a child? Standing in front of the principal of the kindergarten their child was about to enter, George and Madison were visibly flustered and embarrassed. It was already a prestigious private kindergarten with a long-standing reputation. The revelation of such unfavorable family circumstances must have been unbearable for them. Madison, apprehensively, asked David. Does this mean our child's admission will be revoked? David slightly tilted his head with a stern look but soon returned to his usual expression and replied. For now, let's observe your child's behavior in the kindergarten. Does that mean our child can still attend? George and Madison seemed relieved. However, they seemed unaware of how challenging life in the kindergarten could be. Life at the kindergarten turned out to be a disaster for George and Madison. This was because our kindergarten had a strong community among the parents. And even a hint of negative gossip could spread quickly. Thus, rumors about Madison stealing her husband from the principal's wife spread like wildfire. Most parents were strict about their children's education, so George and Madison were quickly ostracized. Their situation affected their child. Liam, who became isolated from his peers and cried every day, wanting to leave the kindergarten. Eventually, they had to withdraw from the kindergarten, and the family disappeared from our lives. Later, David heard from another kindergarten principal one news. George's family had transferred Liam to a public kindergarten. However, the same rumors spread there too, making their local standing increasingly uncomfortable. Eventually, George and Madison left Liam. Lately, it seems that Madison's parents are the ones attending kindergarten drop-offs, pickups, and events. Madison's parents, who were well-liked in the neighborhood, attended kindergarten events and ensured Liam could attend without issues. Even Madison's parents, who had been indulgent, seemed to have given up on her, deciding to raise Liam as his guardians. I was concerned for Liam, but hearing this from David, I felt relieved. Sometime later, Madison's parents came to apologize. We're sorry for coming so late. We wanted to bring Madison, but she absolutely refused. Is Madison back at home? I was surprised to hear Madison was at home, having heard that the couple was missing. According to her parents, George and Madison, unable to endure poverty, divorced, and only Madison returned home. Yet, Liam doesn't see her as a mother, and she's ignored at home. Time passed, and I gave birth to a daughter, my first child. Having delivered in a local hospital, I made many mom friends. Though I lost a childhood friend, I now look forward to spending time with mom friends in similar situations. David took paternity leave and has been an excellent hands-on dad. This might be the happiest time of my life. No, I intend to continue enjoying parenting with good family and friends around. I want to pour all my love into raising my daughter just like my mother did for me. Even if there are times when I head in the wrong direction, like my daughter. I'll trust in my family, the people around me, and above all, myself. vowing to live a strong life as a mother.